Hi everyone, welcome to our latest installment of the AWS and Innovation Bay content series. My name is Rohit Bhargava and I am part of the startup team at AWS, where our mission is to help grow the quantity and quality of startups and founders coming out of Australia and New Zealand. We are extremely excited to have teamed up with the Innovation Bay team to deliver this as a weekly content series that will run every Thursday from 12 to 1 p.m. If you've joined us for the last few weeks, you'll know that until now, this series has been focused on bringing you the real stories and insights of founders and operators that have dealt with the coalface of the pandemic. We spoke to Jody Oster, the GM of Uber Eats, on how Uber is tackling the unique challenges on a global level. We spoke to Toby Scoverin about the unique challenges that he's faced across his multiple businesses, as well as speaking to Rachael Yang from the Impact Investment Group and how her portfolio of companies have been dealing with the fallout from COVID. Today is the first step in shifting towards a new focus for the series as we start to come out of the other side. We want to help prepare you and your companies for success. We'll be running this as a weekly series of masterclasses where we will bring you world-class practitioners and experts to dive deep on specific topics and areas they specialize in. And we're delighted to have Tim Doyle, the founder of Eucalyptus, to talk about all things customer acquisition and building direct-to-consumer brands. Before I hand over the mic to Rachael, just a few quick notes from me. First of all, if you aren't already familiar with Innovation Bay, it is the longest running community group for tech startups and investors in Australia. Their mission is to support founders on their journey from idea to IPO and beyond. They run events and programs across the country and now online, all focused on helping a community of over 5,000 founders, people working in startups, investors, and others to learn, connect, and grow. If you're not already a member, sign up at innovationbay.com. And lastly, if you're joining us for the first time, I also just wanted to give you a quick rundown of how the session will run. We will start with around 35 to 40 minutes of Rachael interviewing Tim before we jump into questions from you. Please submit any questions you have into the Q&A tab, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. I'll jump in at the end to facilitate this part of the session. We also have a chat function running so you can engage with others in attendance, but as always, please be considerate of others whenever speaking in these channels. With that out of the way, I'll hand over the mic to Rachael Neumann to kick things off.
Thanks so much, Rohit. Hi, everyone. I'm Rachael Neumann from the Amazon Web Services team. So welcome to our webinar series. We have loved having so many of you join us week after week while we were in peak uncertainty. And now with things starting to settle down, we hope, we've heard from many of you that what you want to see now is actual deep dives with experts like the one we have today on topics that they are absolute masters in. Over time, we're going to build up this repository of killer masterclasses where you can learn critical skills from the leaders in the field. So we're experimenting with that today. We'd love your feedback. And so I'm excited to welcome Tim Doyle to the show. For those of you who don't know Tim, you would be a minority, but Tim is the founder of Eucalyptus, which is the brand engine that builds and runs digital consumer companies. Its first two cabs off the rank are Pilot and Kin. We'll talk more about those. They're tackling the important but often under-discussed topics of men's health, including hair loss and sexual performance, and women's reproductive health, both on the birth control and the fertility side. Eucalyptus is backed by Blackbird Ventures, and very recently closed an impressive $8 million funding round where Woolies investment arm W23 joined in to make their second ever investment. Prior to launching Eucalyptus, Tim led marketing for Koala, where he led the pioneering marketing campaigns to make basically mattress in a box, super sexy, and a household name. Welcome so much. Thank you so much, Tim. Welcome.
Thanks, Rachael. Thank you for having me.
Tim, I'm going to jump in with a slightly personal question. I hope it doesn't make you squirm too much, but you're largely known as one of Australia's, if not one of the world's absolute marketing geniuses. What do you think makes you different from other marketers? Or if you're less comfortable answering that question, what makes a good marketer in your mind?
I mean, I do think a lot about like why we have historically in companies that I've been involved in done things a little bit differently. And I think it's partly because of coming into the industry at a time of like enormous change and coming from a place where it was very difficult to get feedback on marketing performance generally for like decades. And so you relied on experts in agencies to provide you with insight into what worked and then kind of hoped it did for your brand. Whereas I came in from a very analytical background, like I did finance at uni and thought, hey, like there are these feedback loops now on everything. And so therefore paying for expertise doesn't seem relevant when your customers will just tell you what they like straight away. And so I guess all of the marketing engines that I've been involved in building have been about integrating and responding to that feedback as quickly as and effectively as possible, and then using that to scale. So I guess like my number one marketing principle from myself is like, I know pretty much nothing about anything to do with creative or marketing strategy or anything like that, but I am very responsive to feedback, and I like to focus on engine building and letting the numbers take me wherever they go.
I mean, this is music to my ears. People know that I'm, quite obsessed with this customer-driven, product design. You mentioned a little bit around, why you think that's successful, but what do companies that you've seen systematically get wrong? What are some of the major pitfalls that you see them tripping over?
I think the biggest one, we're talking, there are different problems at different stages. And I think the most common problem that I see for early stage companies is obsessing about brand and spending a lot of time designing something without really understanding, designing a grand vision for a brand and a grand brand strategy in a time when in reality, you've only got a tiny amount of attention from your customer. And so designing something broad when something specific is required. And then wondering why they don't reach relevance because they're confused about what they're communicating to their customers. So I would say being overly ambitious in branding is probably the biggest early stage thing. And then the biggest late stage thing is not listening to your customers.
I'm actually if anyone joined us last week, we're experimenting with a new structure where we actually ask the audience to lean in and weigh in on some issues. So I'm going to start to pick your expertise on where are those areas you think we should lean in, but I want people who are on the line right now to answer, where do you disproportionately spend your marketing time and budget right now? As we know, there are many aspects ranging from customer acquisition, lifecycle management, brand. So right now, with your limited resources, where are you spending? We'll just give everyone about 10 seconds to vote. And then why don't we go ahead and put the results of that voting up? All right, community and brand building, which you had just pointed out, Tim, is a bit of a pitfall. So let's actually talk about that. You mentioned that early on that can be a bit dangerous. Other than brand, where should they be thinking about?
Well, I think okay, so let's talk about what you do early stage that I think is really successful. So let's talk about Pilot, for example. Pilot has very broad ambitions to be something that redefines men's health in this country. And there are parts to that which are about tackling stigmas. There's parts to that which are about kind of creating access. And there's a very broad scope. But in the first 6 months of the brand, we were a convenience differentiation for people that didn't have time to go to the doctor. And so we were very deliberate, narrow, and focused around our messaging. And so what we would do is we would iterate extremely quickly on creative to find things that best delivered that message in channels that we knew had scale. So the brand that Pilot will be when it's a $500 million business with a million customers is entirely different to where we are now, and we acknowledge that, and we are willing to do the simple, silly, dumb things to make sure we're effective now, and then unlock the capability to do bigger, more ambitious things down the line.
Can you give an example? What is a silly, dumb thing now that just gets the job done?
I would say we wrote 1,000 text-based Facebook ads in the first 4 months of the business. There were all small iterations on the same messaging to find what was the best way to express this thing that we knew people wanted. And do I think that is a way to scale a brand beyond 6 months in and 1,000 customers? No, absolutely not. It's gone as a thing. Facebook as a source of long-term differentiation is dead. But did I think we needed to do that at the beginning? Yeah, absolutely. So what we do on TV, what we do on radio, that will be iterations that started in a really simple way 6 months ago.
I want to just take a step back because, let's talk about Eucalyptus. You decide to come out the gate swinging, right? You're tackling subjects that are still quite taboo. I've actually heard your radio ad for Pilot mention that you can't even say the term erectile dysfunction on air, which is crazy since it's a very real medical issue for men that's already quite stigmatized. Why did you decide to start here? Getting to, these pretty private issues And then how have you thought about breaking into hearts and minds for people for whom these are pretty closed door topics?
For sure. I think the reason that we started where we did is because we wanted to use technology as a lever to create an initial differentiation, and then we wanted to use our ability to solve like a fundamental problem, and then our ability as communicators to then build a reputation around that solution. So what our primary innovation is like a digital text-focused consult with a GP that then connects you with a doctor and a pharmacy if you're suitable. So we wanted to take that innovation and then communicate it in a way that like was focused on destigmatization, and we really thought we could create a differentiation. And so that we build the technology, and then like our ability to make content and innovate and like iterate on content means that we were able to take that innovation and present it in a really interesting way to crack that stigma. So we wanted to leverage what we did well, which was build technology and communicate in an area where we thought those two things were the major problem.
Mm. And can I ask about, you personally, Tim, like you were kicking goals, heading a marketing function at Koala. What made you decide personally to shift gears and take the leap to building and running your own company?
I mean, I had an amazingly great opportunity at Koala to learn from some really good people. I thought that I had done most of what I could do to contribute to that business's growth. And I think like we were able to hand off to some really great, like kind of mature business leaders after us. And we thought, you know what, like the things that we've learned doing this over the next 2 years, we think they're repeatable and applicable. So Charlie Gearside, who was creative director, and I decided to have a crack at that. And I think it was a bit of like an itch that we had to scratch,
Yeah. I want to talk about this kind of repeatability and, what can be applicable across a number of brands. It's pretty ambitious what Eucalyptus is trying to do. I mean, it's hard enough building one company, building a pilot or building a kin, and you've decided to basically build this house of brands. Tell me about your ambition to do that rather than, kind of some conventional wisdom that is around, being hyper-focused in one product, one customer group.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of reasons why we believe that this is the right way to go. The first is like relatively unique to Australia, where there are probably not, billion-dollar consumer-focused startup opportunities everywhere just because of the size of our population. But there is a lot of really good $50 to $100 million opportunities, right? So I guess the question is, can you build a billion-dollar company by capitalizing on a couple of those? And I think I fundamentally believed to begin with that we could. I think the second reason is we looked at the great consumer product companies of the last century, and we were like, very few of them are narrowly focused. If we're looking at like Johnson & Johnson or Procter & Gamble or even, Nike, we're looking at companies that have succeeded by being able to create like deep pools of customers across a number of different areas. And I think like we definitely took that to heart in terms of the company that we wanted to build. And then I think the third thing was that we thought those companies didn't really structurally reflect the demands of a digital first kind of generation of company building. So we wanted to look at the different capabilities that made up great direct-to-consumer companies and see if we could build them in a way that could support multiple brands. So you're looking at like, what does a technology team look like that runs, what does the technology team look like that runs the 21st century Procter & Gamble? I don't know, but I'd like to find out, what does the marketing team look like? What does the supply chain team look like? What does the product development team look like? And so answering those questions across those three areas was like the big opportunity for us. And that's kind of why we're pushing in the direction that we are.
So let me ask you, what does the marketing team look like? I think a lot of people probably want to pick your brain around this. And I guess in particular, how do you balance both the kind of creativity that's required in marketing, but also, as you mentioned very early, in our conversation, that technical capability, that metrics and data-driven decision-making?
For sure. I think like marketing has gone through a really interesting and fundamental shift where it's like, it was the world of like the big creative that like dominated a century worth of marketing, and the great stories were the ones of the incredible campaigns. Then you had probably 15 years of early internet stuff where it was like metrics, how well can you buy media? And I think like the reality is like Facebook and Google have made it so easy to buy media now that world is now disappearing again. And so you have this like new state where your ability to combine creative and media buying is the key to success. And so the attitude that we took at Koala was that like, we don't necessarily know what's going to work at all. But if we can try as many things as possible, then iteration in the machine, like the ability to continue to iterate really quickly will mean that like we can figure out what works and then scale it. And so I guess the way to think about it is people are consuming more media than they ever have. Therefore, more advertising will go unseen than ever before. So only the great things will stand out, but you don't know what's going to be great. And so your job as a marketer is to have as many cracks as possible and then double down and scale the things that work. So the measurement framework to ensure that you know what works, and then the speed of iteration to figure out what works. And then those two things combined create a marketing engine that works.
Amazing. Do you have a favorite metric? I mean, I know that in marketing, they're the ones that we all know, but what's Tim Doyle's favorite metric?
Like I'm a sucker for like the high funnel version of your purchase event. So like it's different in different businesses. For some, it's an add to cart. Like I like that really strong statement of intent that is extremely measurable in a fast feedback loop environment.
What does that mean for a pilot or kin? Like, what is that moment for you guys?
The consult start. So when someone starts a consult with us, we treat that as like the high funnel proof that they are engaged with the brand. I think like if you're any higher than that and you're in like the clicks or content views world, then you're too high. And if you're any lower than that, I think you're probably measuring things that rely more on your digital experience rather than your advertising. So I think like whatever the high, I like to talk to people about like their high funnel purchase indicator. So that could be a lead, it could be like a consult, it could be an add to cart. It's different by business, but I like the fact that they're fast feedback loops usually.
Yeah. I often talk about that as kind of the magic moment, that when a customer arrives at that magic moment, there's a high predictor that they will then have the behaviors you want, whether that's purchase, loyalty, et cetera. And so what I often talk about is how can you ensure that every step before that is trying to get them to that magic moment, because once they're there, they're sticky. So how do you think about the activities or the steps in the customer journey prior to that moment, and how do you iterate to improve those?
So the way that I like to think about the pre-magic moment steps are like, the first thing you're trying to do obviously is like gather attention. So I think like a lot of people miss the fact that your first obligation as a marketer is to like capture someone's intention. And you're not entitled to attention. You are like competing in a landscape where every single brand, every single media organization, every single thing is trying to compete. And so like a lot of people kind of used to ask us all the time about Koala was like, oh, you make all these really ambitious bets with your creative. And it's like, well, we're trying to sell like what is largely a block of foam in a very competitive, we've got to make that interesting somehow. And so we would make big bets to do that. And then once you've got that attention, then it is like, can we build trust? And I think then it's like, what is our key point of differentiation? And can we communicate that in a way that like gets people to understand it? So even before trust is like, can I get people to understand what we do? Like, can I get someone to tell me why Pilot is a differentiated offering? How do I measure that? Is usually like, can I get them deep enough into the web experience that they're doing that? And then the last bit is, can I get them to trust us enough to make a step, which is a commitment? And so like, I like to think of it as like attention, engagement, trust, and then you've got them in your purchase realm and you're playing a bit of a different game.
I mean, you've kind of teed up the next question, if we think back to Koala. So, Pilot and Kin are a pretty differentiated experience. Koala is a largely undifferentiated product that you manage to, put some sort of unique wrapper around it. For the people who are listening, if they have either a largely undifferentiated product or a very competitive environment, what are some of the things that they can do to stand out and create some sort of differentiation?
So the way that I think about this is like differentiation comes in three forms, basically. I think the first way is you can have genuine product differentiation. So you can be Neuro headphones and you can have personalized sound, and your job is to communicate that product differentiation. The second tranche of innovation and differentiation is like more customer experience led, where it's like the way that I interact with this product has been changed by some, so like Koala has this with 4-hour delivery, right? It has been able to change the way people shop for furniture right through from purchase through to assembly by increasing the convenience. And that has been what they have built a business around. And then I think the third type is like you can have community or brand driven differentiation. And that is where you like align values around a specific set of things and then sell products based on that alignment of values. And the example there is like Who Gives a Crap, who have built an incredibly successful, multi-$100 million brand based on values alignment. And so I guess like my view is that differentiation falls into one of those three categories, and don't mistake having to do all three. Find your one, focus on your one, communicate your one, and then let the one allow you to do more.
Amazing. And we had Simon Griffiths from Who Gives a Crap on the show a few weeks ago. And, that story is amazing. And he said pretty much the same thing as you, Tim. He said there's very little innovation left to be done to the humble toilet roll, but we can definitely differentiate both the customer experience, but also communicating what our value is and making sure that we're delivering on that. So, just a great insight to think about. There are three levers that you can pull, and you don't need to be doing all three of them. I want to, given that Eucalyptus is going to be this platform and that there will be other brands that will spin up, there are abundance of opportunities or products that you could tackle. How do you assess which products or markets you're going to go after? And maybe also, what is your kind of kill continue decision point?
Yeah, it's a tough question. I don't think I have a very good answer for this. I think like it's a very live discussion internally within our business, and that discussion happens every day. And I think the point I'm at now with it is I need to believe in the differentiation first and foremost for any new stuff that we're going to do. The second thing is I need to believe that differentiation plays into our core strengths. And so I need to believe that like we can deliver on it through technology or our marketing prowess. The third thing is I need to believe that the opportunity is like stable and big enough. And I think that is often quite hard to do. And then once I'm at that point, then I think like it's worth testing something. And then in terms of kill continue points, I think we've been pretty poor at that in terms of, I think we don't bring things to discrete points particularly well. And I'd love to be better at it in terms of being able to go, this point is the time when we decide whether something is pursuing or not. We have a lot of embers that will never become flames. And I don't know necessarily whether we're very good at pouring water on them in the way that we should be. But, that's like, I think it's very easy to come on things like this and be like, look how good we are at all these different things. And we're not. We're good at like one or two things. And those one or two things have been enough to start a business. And we have to figure out a lot more stuff before we're a genuinely good business. Yeah.
I think that's a very humble and honest assessment of where most companies are around their Series A raise, where it's an acknowledgement of, what got us here isn't necessarily going to get us there, and thinking about where that next tranche of growth comes from, what that next evolution is. And I think that people who start off thinking that they have this 10-year plan that they're going to follow step by step are probably mistaken.
For sure.
So in the spirit of kind of evolution, what do you think was the biggest surprise in how Pilot or Kin or Eucalyptus more broadly has evolved in your mind? And yeah, what are some of those lessons learned?
So like, as I look back on, and I think like the Series A fundraising process is it's a great forcing mechanism for looking back on what you believed at the beginning. And I think Rachel actually spoke to you before we started. So you've probably heard the first version of it.
Well, Tim, what you didn't hear was me talking to Rohit before this call, which is you are my one of my regrets of the checks that I haven't written. You will forever be in my anti-portfolio, but I wish you all the best.
It could be your wisest sidestep. Who knows?
Time will tell.
So I guess anyway, back to the question about like what I think we've learned is I think what we've learned is that the core differentiations that you come up with at the beginning they need to form a core. Like you can't have disparate sources of differentiation running at the same time, because it'll pull the business in different directions. And so even though you can be chasing disparate opportunities, they have to come together with more binding things than you probably believe at the beginning. I think that we were talking about a range of things across consumer packaged goods. I mean, we can paint the range this way, as we both talked about dog food and prams as opportunities. And I just don't think we could have done that. I think what we've done in terms of building a core that is focused, that then takes advantage of opportunities within a similar space, is actually has been really important. And so I think this is only kind of a useful lesson for those chasing multi-brand opportunities, which I guess is pretty rare. But I think having a core differentiation that you do well, that you can repeat, has been crucial to our ability to scale it all. And I feel quite lucky, because we didn't definitely set out with that. We set out with something much more random and broad.
Yeah. And I'm just going to share one lesson learned as an investor to any of those investors on the call, is that, I probably in the beginning was a little spooked by the diversity of ambitions that you had. What I know now is that I just know that you're a total rock star, and I should have just trusted you to figure it out, which I think that you have done and you will done, which is why you go into my regret bucket.
Who knows? Maybe.
I want to talk about growth, right? We have one school of thought that kind of glorifies growth, whether it's customer acquisition, revenue, land expansion, geo expansion. But sometimes that's at the expense of unit economics, which is fine when you're in super frothy funding environments, maybe less fine when you are heading into potentially a protracted recession. How do you think about balancing the two? How do you think about balancing growth and customer acquisition costs, and how do you work to keep those things in check?
Well, I think this is what we're learning now about the direct-to-consumer thing 10 years ago, or maybe not even 10 years ago, maybe 7 years ago. It popped up as this incredible opportunity where you could create a brand quite quickly, pour a whole lot of marketing dollars on top of it, grow it extremely quickly, and then people thought that they would dominate categories, and then that category domination would mean that they became profitable. And I think it's no secret that there are examples of that failing horribly, where undifferentiated products poured dollars into Facebook and ended up with businesses like Casper that were not particularly viable, or brandless that weren't viable at all. And so this idea that you could create growth without solid unit economics has kind of died, a pretty painful death, actually. And I think we're lucky. I mean, I was super lucky at Koala, because we saw that happening because of the size of Australia as a market. We saw that happening way earlier than anybody else probably did. And we knew that we had to create differentiation in terms of unit economics at a much more fundamental level than some of these companies in the US had. So we had to expand product range into sofas and into bed bases and into pillows and into sheets to get that LTV CAC gap big enough that this business continued to be profitable in a world of rising cost of acquisition. And so the new normal from my perspective is you do things that create improvements in your unit economics, and then you use dollars to scale those things, as opposed to doing it the other way around.
Yeah. It's funny that you bring up brandless. I don't know the kind of backstory and the economics of that. I do know that I love the products, but I recently was speaking with the founder who now invests or is spinning up a bunch of DTC plays. And one of his number one rules is I'm only doing products that are profitable from day one, that have that unit economics, that with the first item shipped and received, that is a profitable transaction. So I think it's, definitely confirming what you're saying, that we need to kind of flip this model and make sure that there's a viable business that, stacks behind the product and the customer value proposition.
For sure. It's just for a lot of venture capital in the early 2010s, there was, they'd seen SaaS companies where you pour money in, you acquire customers, and because of their retention profiles, they become incredibly profitable over time. And I think people underrepresented how easy it was going to be to start an e-commerce company in 2020. If you want to compete with Koala, you probably only need 4 weeks. and you probably have something in market. It's complex and you probably won't do very well initially, but it's not impossible. And so the market dominant position in e-commerce is not built on particularly strong foundations unless you have some differentiation beyond the fact that you're the biggest.
Mm. I think you were starting to allude to, certainly in your conversation around rapid feedback loops and making sure you're able to iterate. I did a talk, I don't know if it was yesterday or the day before, I can't even remember, with Blackbird on their Giants program, where I showed some research that basically said consumer preferences, first of all, they are growing faster and they are larger than ever before. So consumers are just continuing to raise the bar. I shared this example in retail where basically they want everything. And then it was stacked up against what is actually available. And then it's stacked up as what are they actually willing to pay a premium for? And basically the headline is they want everything well above what is already on offer. And, spoiler alert, they're not really willing to pay for it. How should people leading businesses, especially from a marketing perspective, continue to stay abreast to these very rapidly changing and very high expectations of customers and continuing to meet their demands? Because one of the things we know is that I think like the brand loyalty that our parents had to, Clorox bleach is really different to a millennial where like any bleach will do. So how do you drive loyalty when demands are just getting higher and higher and faster?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think it's something that I would imagine if you had, a panel of people in my position, whether it be like Simon from Who Gives a Crap or Danny at Koala or, any of those types, we would probably share the fear that exists around maintaining customer loyalty in a world where you're 3 clicks from your Instagram feed to purchasing a competitor's product. And, so I think the way that I think about this at the moment is what technology infrastructure can I build to ensure that the experience that I deliver after the first transaction maintains a level of quality that means that switching is crazy.
Yep.
So how do we create stickiness in an environment where product differentiation erodes extremely quickly? And so you're what value can I provide customers in the post-purchase experience? How can I get them content? How can I build technology tools? How do I build data infrastructure that allows them to get value out of their interactions with us over time? Those principles that great SaaS companies have. How do I start to do that in an environment where my first purchase is, a medication or an over-the-counter product or something that is simple and relatively undifferentiated?
Yeah. And I know we talk about this, in AWS when we talk about our startups. Many of our startups come in because we have an amazing Activate program where what is most attractive is the credits, but ideally we're providing so much value above and beyond free credits that it is irrational for them to go anywhere when those credits expire. So I think that is the onus on all of us that have some sort of product and service, and that is to create an experience that is so valuable that to leave would be irrational, even when faced with something that to others might seem comparable.
Yeah, in a world of low switching costs, how do we raise the switching costs? And I think that has to be done through continued delivery of experience, as long as you hold that customer.
Like having experts like you tell us about marketing and make that available to our customers. So as you know, in previous conversations on this show, we've over-indexed on the impacts of COVID that have been on different people's businesses. How has the change in climate impacted you and your business? Has it at all had an impact?
Yeah, I mean, we are in telehealth, and telehealth is now a much bigger part of people's lives. So I think we have obviously benefited in some ways, but at the same time, things that we built to differentiate ourselves were eroded very quickly by changes in legislation. So for example, you can get the contraceptive pill over the counter at pharmacies at the moment, which makes a lot of KIN's infrastructure or at least sources of initial differentiation a little bit redundant. So it's been an incredibly tumultuous time where I've felt the need to essentially play quarterback to our marketing engine much more than I've ever felt in my career today. But it's also created a lot of opportunities. So we believed that we had a fundamental role to play through this. We believed we had to change our messaging to play that role. And we believed that there would be a whole lot of different media opportunities that presented that we could use to build long-term value for the brand. And hopefully we've reacted really quickly to act on those.
I'm going to actually throw up our second poll because I'm curious to know, in this economic downturn, when many companies are thinking about cutting costs, I want to know if folks would be spending more or less on marketing right now. And then Tim, you can let us know what you've decided to do and what your guidance is for others. So let's give folks maybe 10 or 15 more seconds to answer this. If it was your decision, would you be spending more or less on marketing? There have been interesting kind of thought pieces written on both sides. I've definitely heard plenty of investors saying now is the time to batten down the hatches, cut costs. And we know from even our large media companies that just spend on ads has, significantly decreased. And then we have, other investors saying, I know that Nikki Skivak from Blackbird said, like, this is the moment where you should be kind of over-indexing. So let's get the results of that poll. All right, 80%, doubling down. Tim, what do you think? Is that a smart decision?
Look, I'm gonna go in a very binary way. I'm gonna say yes, but I'm completely aware of this idea that it's very important to understand how the changing environment has impacted the fundamentals of your business, right? So it's like, if we have a greater role to play in consumers' lives, then we should be doubling down. If we believe that communicating our proposition, look, let's bring this into a really specific example. I don't think all of the ads that were made in both the US and Australia that were like, stay inside, we're a clean brand, that have just kind of generally tried to deliver a brand message in this time are effective. I think that's lazy allocation of already spent money in a way that does nothing. But I think if you're clever and responsive and it suits you to be active at this time, then there's never been a better time. And I think, if you're looking at Blackbird's portfolio, I definitely think there are companies where it makes a lot of sense for them to be spending up. If you're Canva and everyone's at home and working from home and doing design, then obviously it's a great time to be spending money on marketing. If you're safety culture and nobody's in the workplace, then maybe it's not, so being flexible to both what messaging works to where you, it's great for us because we were just responsive, right? So Pilot has benefited hugely, Kin a little bit less. So we saw an opportunity with the return of sport last weekend, we saw that the media pricing was quite cheap. So we went extremely hard at that inventory last weekend and did quite well off the back of it. So I think be opportunistic and be responsive is my broad advice rather than up or down, which, depends on who you are.
Yep. Well, I think this is a good time for us to just shift gears. I think Rohit has a bunch of questions that have come in from the audience, both during this session and prior to. So Tim, if you're up for it, let's get some audience questions.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks for a great discussion, Rachel and Tim. There are several questions that are submitted. Just a reminder for everyone that's tuning in as well, if you have any additional questions, please put them into the Q&A tab and we'll try and get to as many as possible. Just pulling on the thread that both of you discussed around funding for Eucalyptus as well, especially given it is such a sort of different, unique and interesting model in the market that, as Rachel mentioned, was a little bit maybe difficult to grasp for early stage investors as well in terms of specifically what you were trying to do. So there was a question from Lucy to talk about, can you share with us what the hurdles venture investors had in backing Eucalyptus and how you overcame those?
Yeah, for sure. So I think anybody who's attempted to raise for a direct consumer company in the last couple of years will know this experience where to be raising for something that is out of vogue at a time is quite difficult. And I think we were getting a lot of feedback, which was, we're not certain that this model actually works as a venture-backed entity. I think I wouldn't be stepping on any toes to tell you that Paul Bassett from SquarePeg absolutely roasted me about the direct-to-consumer model. And with good reason, he was right. And so I think the way that we overcame that general category ambivalence was to directly answer the questions related to why the category was failing. So previous venture investors have done this in this space, and we believe that we are different because we represent something that looks more like something else, and being very upfront and overt with that, almost leading the cost discussion, which is like, this model has failed. The version 2 of this model will look like this, rather than trying to hide from the fact that you were doing an unpopular business model at the time.
Great points. The next question comes from an anonymous attendee. The question is, hey Tim, based on your experience from Koala, between Facebook ads, Google, influencer marketing, email, what marketing channel provides the best ROI and customer acquisition value to a startup in e-com consumer goods, assuming the budget is around 10K?
Very specific question. Is that 10K a month, do you reckon?
I think that's about 10K a month.
This sounds more like a free consultation, doesn't it?
Yeah. Okay. So I think there are like very, very important principles to know here. And I think the first of those is Facebook was an ARB for like 5 years, like from 2010 or 11 to 15, 16. The cost of Facebook impressions was so low and the audience was so high that you could do pretty much anything, retarget your customers to death and sell. And so that was what you did. But now it's so competitive and so expensive that the reality is you can't scale a brand meaningfully on Facebook without unbelievable margins. And so I guess my advice to you on a budget of 10K per month is that you need to be doing your message testing on Facebook, because it is the best feedback mechanism that you have. It's so fast, and you can create so many variants so easily. But you need to be graduating into channels where your customers over-index and where you can create a creative advantage over that space. So for example, like Taboola, which is largely Taboola and Outbrain, which are like largely junk channels most of the time, can be really great if you over-index in older people and like a content-heavy business. So like the willingness to shop in a broader range of channels is now imperative to building e-commerce businesses. Whereas 5 years ago, even for me, like I was just like literally retargeting people to death, and it was great.
Can I ask a follow-up question there, Tim? You have two, I mean, I'm assuming different customer populations with Kin and with Pilot. You have men and women. Have you found that different channels work better or worse for the gender split?
Hugely different channels. I mean, I've been amazed by how differently different demographic groups engage with their health. For instance, we have content-heavy offerings in both. The content-heavy offering in Kin adds enormous value to the customer experience. The content-heavy offering in Pilot largely gets ignored.
Are you saying women read and men don't?
Yeah, I mean, maybe not to simplify to that. Yeah, maybe that's what I'm missing. But yeah, so yeah, we've had to be a lot more. I mean, like the super simple, crude example of this is like Pilot spends a whole lot of money on Pornhub, like, and I know that's crude and like, but like it works. And so that's the channel. Like we've probably tried 50 different channels for Pilot. We only use 5 or 6 now, but we definitely will try anything, and then scale the things that work. And Kin is the same. It's different, and we just figure out what works and then double down where it does.
What's Kin's equivalent of porno? Where do we go? Great. That's my Sunday morning walking porn, I guess, with my headphones on.
Yeah, I'm like, obviously I'm not trying to create like really blunt oversimplifications, but just like you just go where what works, and like you've got to do the creative side of things as well, right? So it's like where you can create effective content and messaging, then that's where you end up going.
Just following that up, there's another question that specifically asks about performance that you've had across Traffic Junkie and Dollar Shave Club. But I guess just kind of more broadly, I also, I think read a tweet recently from one of the early growth people at Uber talking about how a lot of their customer acquisition from the driver side was from Craigslist. And you just kind of touched on Pornhub and all those sort of things, which aren't probably the most obvious choices for startups to go when they look at where they should be spending their marketing spend. How do you sort of assess where these potential opportunities or like these white space opportunities are for you? Is there a framework or a process that you go through?
I think there's definitely a process. There is like, where do our customers over-index? And and where are they likely. Now, this is going to sound like very crude when it's like overlaid with the fact that we've just been talking about traffic junkies specifically, but like, where do the customers over index? Where are they engaged in thinking about the thing that you offer them? And can you create creative differentiation there in an interesting way? And then the last bit being like, is it priced in a way where you think you have an advantage? And like, I mean, KO, last weekend on KO was an example for us, because like KO's numbers were very much down over the no sport period. We knew people would come back when sport started. We knew that the advertising was priced on the number of members a couple of weeks ago. And so we took advantage. That's the really simple, crude example of that working really well for us.
Speaking of advantage, the next question is submitted by Kyle Walker, who wants to know, do you see it as an advantage or a disadvantage to start digital health companies without technology or healthcare founders? And how do you leverage this reality?
We have technology founders. So Charlie is a developer. So I guess like, look, the reason that we started a digital health company without a healthcare founder was because we got healthcare advisors in. We thought that like, look, creating the differentiation would be about focusing on the patient. So our broad goal was to deliver really great patient experiences, and then we could check in with the healthcare side of things as we built those. And so the core differentiation of like communication and technology, they were core in our founding team, and then everything else we could essentially pay for.
The next question, I know that, a lot of your discussion with Rachael was centered around speed and, not focusing on community building. But the next question is from Damien West, who wants to know what your thoughts are on community building for brand awareness prior to launching a hard tech D2C with an 18-month pre-production timeline.
Very specific. Can you deliver value that will bleed into your value for the actual product? Because like, pre-launch stuff is weird because it's very easy to get pre-launch engagement numbers that make you feel good. None of those customers will become customers. And I guess like the two examples that I can share about that is like, we probably had 15,000 people on a pre-launch list for pilot. Maybe 5% of them turned into actual customers. We had 25,000 people pre-launch sign up for interest in the Koala sofa. Not many of them turned into customers. So my view on pre-launch stuff is like, are you delivering value that will logically and naturally bleed into intent? And if you're not, then you're probably padding your own confidence rather than your likelihood of successfully launching the product.
Tim, the other day on my Giants Talk, I talked about this intention behavior gap, which has a correlation R value of 0.3, which is very loosely correlated. And one of the things that we know is the larger gap of time or any sort of barrier that you put between intent and then the actual behavior that you're hoping to see, the less likelihood you have of that behavior happening. And I think I see, again, with this 18-month pre-production timeline, if you are not creating some sort of inherent value and a value that's predictive of the same value that that product will have, you are taking a very big leap of faith and thinking that, my behavior today is a good proxy for what I'm going to do in a very different scenario a year and a half from now.
Yeah, I agree completely.
Speaking of value, another anonymous question, talking about influencer marketing. So from your perspective, would influencer marketing now be considered oversaturated and overpriced for startups? And can you touch on the effectiveness of influencer outreach, not content?
Okay, so influencer marketing is not one channel, right? Like you have a million different people priced in a million different ways. So if you are sharp at pricing, then all you have to do is be sharper than the influencer and you can create value. So to say that influencer marketing is overpriced, if you run the bog standard set of tactics, yeah, absolutely. But I know several fantastic businesses still entirely built off being able to price influencers better than influencers can price themselves. And so if you're good at that, you can definitely, on the outreach side, be really, really effective. And I think like that as a strategy is not going anywhere when you do it well.
Is there a particular, as a follow-up, is there a particular process that you follow in terms of working out what the right price point is from your side?
Yeah, I was lucky enough to kind of like have exposure to people that really understood deeply the pricing mechanisms of influencers. And so I guess like the first thing is like you want to see overlap of audience with the audience that you're trying to target. Then you want to see some kind of depth of engagement that suggests a level of trust between follower and influencer. And then you want to see some previous outcome where someone similar has achieved a result. And then you want to be able to believe that you can create content that aligns your brand to their brand in a way that drives people from them to you.
Last question for me.
Can I ask one follow-up question to that, Tim? You know, I also always tell people to look at, you know, historical data to be the best predictor of what might happen in the future. In this respect, if you're trying a very new product or a very, you know, novel and differentiated experience, what do you use as some reliable predictors of success or of uptake?
So I essentially like to take a lot of really small bets. And so if I don't know and there's a lot of uncertainty, what is the smallest bite I can take out of something in order to create a test that I can get a feedback loop on?
Great. Sorry, Rohit. I think we have a last question.
I was about to say final question before. I know Rachel generally likes to end with the final question as well. So last question is submitted by Paloma Newton, who wants to know how much have you relied on consumer surveying when it comes to deciding the right price point for your product?
Oh my God. Pricing sucks. There is no other way to think about that. And don't consumer survey. Like they will tell you a ridiculously random range of things. My one piece of advice on pricing, and this comes from our experience with a few different things, is it is much easier to go up than it is to come down. So start low, generate demand, get feedback, and then raise. And then be willing to raise your prices. Because once you know that you're low, you can go up with confidence. You don't want to punish your early adopters by coming down. And so my view is always start low, generate volume, get that feedback going, and then be willing to move quickly upward.
Do you, just as a follow-up to that, do you frame your pricing then initially in terms of adding value or sort of providing something back to your early adopters with a view to pricing changing down the line?
Not really. Like we do internally, and like we have that view about what we're going to do, but I don't think so. I think the value has to stack up on its own, and like you have to say like, hey, you're not getting this because you're an early adopter. You're getting this because you're going to be a customer. But then you have some view internally to raising those prices at some point once you are confident that you're delivering on the service level that you believed you were going to.
Like you said, that whole intent piece, right? You don't want people buying because they feel like there's value. You want them buying because they see value in your product.
Exactly.
Well, Tim, thank you. That's been an absolute awesome masterclass. I know I learned a ton, and I'm sure everyone who tuned in did as well. So typically as Rohit alluded to, I finish with a question around kind of your hopes of what will kind of come out of this crisis with what we will have gained or learned. But, you know, given that we're hopefully, you know, seeing our way out of it, what is your biggest piece of advice for anyone who, you know, is looking to you for advice? Like what is the golden nugget that they should always be thinking about or right now should be thinking about for their company?
Like I've just become like, the more I've thought about it over time, the more like I believe in this like concept of value. And like, if you can find ways to create value for people at a lower price than like in any element of what you do, if you can be like, hey, I'm doing this for cheaper than I'm getting out of it. And that comes down to like hiring or creative or media buying. If you can continue to create those value opportunities, then like your business builds value. And like, I just like apply that in so many different ways at the moment that like, I feel like it's like a defining mantra for me. And so hopefully other people might find that useful as well.
Great. Tim, thanks again so much. Rohit, take us home, and everyone who's on right now, hopefully we'll see you back next time.
Once again, thank you very much to Tim and Rachel for that deep dive into direct consumer brands, all things customer acquisition and marketing. That was really, really great from my perspective. I definitely felt like I personally took a lot away from that conversation. And also thank you to all of you for joining us for this session as well. and taking time out of your day to sit in on probably a number of Zoom calls throughout the day as well. Just 2 quick notes from me before we sign off. So first of all, as mentioned previously, we'll be shifting focus for this series. And as a result, we're taking a bit of a break next week, but we're back at 12 p.m. on Thursday, the 18th of June with Sam Wong from Blackbird. And secondly, as a thank you for joining us, we are providing $5,000 in AWS Activate credits available to everyone who has registered and attended this session. The details and terms and conditions behind this offer will be sent to you via email. Once again, thank you all for joining us. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.